Okay, so this week we're going to talk about Confucianism and animals largely. I had a student expressed to me they were surprised that this was the topic because Confucius really does not talk a whole lot about animals. This is not a major subject of concern. He hasn't got like a book about here's how you treat animals. There are some relevant passages that get discussed in our reading. The reading is Fan Ruiping, How Should We Treat Animals? A Confucian Reflection. And the main question he's wrestling with in this paper is what to do about ritual sacrifice. So there's a whole bunch of rituals prescribed by, not exactly prescribed by Confucius, but certainly endorsed by him. Confucianism as a kind of like worldview or practice involves quite a few rituals, and quite a few of them involve killing and or eating animals. But at the same time, Confucius advocates for something like care or love towards animals. So that appears on its face to be a kind of tension or conflict, and there have been at least a few people who argued that given the world as it is in the 21st century, Confucians should, based on this injunction to take care of or give love to animals, they should stop using animals in ritual contexts. And Ruiping wants to say, his conclusion here is that no, actually the Confucianism requires taking animal lives as part of these rituals, and at the same time requires us to care about animals. These two things are compatible. We should believe both of those things. So we'll go through that. Does that sound, is the project here clear? He's essentially arguing that if you want to be a good Confucian, he doesn't argue that you should be a good Confucian. So there's no argument here for the Confucian worldview. He's saying if you want to adopt the Confucian sort of philosophy, then you should be inclined to sacrifice animals in the right kind of circumstances. And at the same time, you should care about animals. That's the argument here. It's a bit the compatibility between those two things. Okay, so we're familiar with Confucius, yes? This name should ring a bell. At minimum, this name should ring a bell. I'm going to use the Latinized version, Confucius. That was super duper not his name. Master Kong or Kongzi is something more accurate, but my pronunciation is so bad that I think I won't inflict that on you. I'm going to go with the Latinized. It's a linguistic crutch that I'm going to lean on. So his dates are something like 551 to 479 BCE. This was a tumultuous time. It's sometimes called the Warring States period. China is not a unified political entity at this time. There's a whole bunch of relatively local powers vying for control. There's a lot of war, there's a lot of uprisings. It's also a strangely kind of productive time intellectually. A whole bunch of really important ideas kind of coalesce around this same time. Confucius is not immediately super famous and influential. His early life circumstances were tough. So he's not from a peasant family, but they weren't like rich and powerful nobles either. He has a kind of like distant noble lineage, but as when he was born, his family was like certainly not the top of the heap. And his father died when he was 3 years old. And that is a real disadvantage in his culture. So the status of your status is intimately tied to the status of your father. His father died when he was super young. That's not a great start. That's a tough start. And he lived poor and worked some like kind of menial jobs. Hey, me too. Until a friend of the family kind of sponsors his education, and he kind of does better from there. After his education, he spends quite a lot of his life kind of traveling around, basically trying to convince people with power, these kind of local powers, warlords, you might call them, of his ideas on how to regulate society. He's trying to convince them of a wide variety of things, but chief among them, crushing your enemies with ruthless violence is probably not a good long-term solution. He advocates for things like tight-knit families, careful education leading to moral cultivation, and social harmony. That's kind of his pitch. And near the end of his life, he kind of returns home and runs a school where he teaches kind of anyone who can come with any kind of tuition. So the smallest tuition you can scrape up, he's willing to teach you. And he's got something like a few thousand students at this period. All right, so that's Confucius. He, in self-describing his contributions to the kind of history of thought, he's one of the most important thinkers. If you haven't heard the basics of Confucius's ideas, you really should have, because he's one of the most important influential thinkers in the history of thought. But he claims that he's not really an innovator in thought, but rather a transmitter. So there's this widespread view around him that that things were better in the past, at least in terms of kind of the virtue, especially in terms of the virtue of rulers. There's a distant past in which rulers really knew what they were doing. They were men of deep virtue and insight, and his goal is to sort of revive that long past virtue and insight, particularly in the rulers. And he thinks he's transmitting and sort of refreshing and, calibrating for his time and place the traditions that he's received, and mostly what he's trying to transmit is kind of virtue. In his context, virtue virtue, which is less a kind of, we've been dealing with moral systems in which there are quite a few of them that are like rules-based. Do this, don't do that. There's attempts to be universal in the ways that they prescribe behavior, and Confucius's notion of ren or virtue is not really like that. It's a highly contextual, living thing. You're supposed to grow it like a plant, or raise it like a child. You're supposed to cultivate it throughout your life and in the people that you're close to. It's not like he wrote down a book of like do's and don'ts, and then that's what he's trying to convince people of. Okay. Good so far. This is all just broad context. Okay, and the thing that he's advocating for is largely framed in terms of fulfilling social roles, about being, and this is again why it's inappropriate to think of this as a set of universal rules. What a good life means properly fulfilling the role that you have in society, a variety of all of the roles that you have in society, and you have several. Doing those well is what it means to live a good life. That's his pitch. Okay, and he frames this. So he says quite a lot about how to do this. And then there's quite a rich textual tradition that kind of interprets his work and elaborates on it. One of his most famous followers, Mencius, again, sorry, the Latinized version of his name, but codifies this into 5 crucial relationships. The ruler and the ruled, parent and child, husband and wife, siblings with each other, and friends. And the idea in each of those is if you act out those relationships in the correct ways, you will be acting virtuously, and that's what it means to have a good life. Now, so the ruler and the subject, let's take as an example, have a kind of mutual obligations to each other. I am not particularly the ruler of anything, but I am a subject of, I guess, His Majesty the King, technically. King Charles, I suppose, is my sovereign right now. And as such, Confucius would say, I have certain responsibility to good old Chucky. I'm supposed to follow the laws of the land. I'm supposed to contribute to society, that kind of thing. But likewise, King Charles has responsibilities to me. He's supposed to, I don't know what actually King Charles is supposed to do. More locally, our local governments have, the Canadian government, they have responsibilities to us, which is to rule wisely and fairly and in the interests of the subjects. So there's kind of mutual responsibility between ruler and ruled. And you can kind of import that to all of the other relationships. Now, putting it that way makes it sound kind of egalitarian. It's not. This is a distinctively hierarchical picture of society. The ruler, you're supposed to do what the ruler says. You're supposed to do what they're supposed to say, that you should do the right things, but you are for sure supposed to do what the ruler says. And in the context, and the analogy between society and the family is very strong. You're supposed to do what your father says. Father's in charge of the family. You're supposed to do what he says. You're supposed to obey his sort of like instructions or whatever. It's very much, now, again, he's supposed to give instructions to you, the child, that are beneficial to you, that allow you to grow up well and have a good life and all that stuff. But it's not sort of like, oh, everybody's ruler and ruled are equal. They're not equal in terms of power. It is a hierarchical society, and in the most literal sense, a patriarchal society. Men are the ones who get to make the decisions, and women are supposed to do what they're told. I don't personally think that that's good, but that's, I don't know, that's what society was like at the time. Okay, so, this is the idea? Okay, we're just doing broad Confucian philosophy. Okay, and we'll get to how this applies to animals shortly. Okay, so I think there's a really interesting example of this, and one of the ways that this can be, you can see how this kind of overrides, or it differs from the kind of moral universalism or individualism that we're mostly used to in the kind of modern West. Your responsibility to your parents can override responsibility to the law, for example. So one time a guy was trying to tell Confucius how awesome he was, and he's like, hey, my people are so law-abiding that I once had a son turn in his father for stealing a sheep. Isn't that awesome how law-abiding my people are? And Confucius says, in my circle, being upright differs from this, which is a very polite way of saying that's not how things should go. A father would conceal such a thing on behalf of his son, and a son would conceal it on behalf of his father. Upright is found in this. This is from the Analects. The Analects are sort of the core collection of Confucian sayings written down by his students. So Confucius is now. Please be clear. Confucius is very much a law and order kind of guy. He is not, go get whatever you want and break the law and F the police or anything. No, he's very much in favor of law and order, but he's even more in favor of what we call filial piety, which is one of the kind of central obligations of everyone, which is being very seriously invested in being kind to your parents. Paying attention to what your parents say and doing what they say is one of the most important features in Confucianism. All right. Okay, and almost done the kind of like broad overview of what Confucianism is about. So one of the things he's red hot on are rituals. So one of the ways that you promote social harmony, one of the ways that you successfully fulfill your social roles and cultivate virtue is by performing rites or rituals, or li. So it is, there are a wide variety of rituals that are considered really important under Confucianism, but you want to, like a wedding ceremony is a really important, so I'm trying to think of ceremonies that in the modern West you'd be familiar with. The wedding ceremony, graduation ceremony, these are like, there's supposed to be a sense of reverence and awe and seriousness that surround those things. A funeral, that kind of thing. But when Confucius talks about ritual, he actually means something quite a bit broader than that. He means kind of the whole fabric of expectations in society. If you answer the phone, ritually you say hello when you answer the phone, instead of like, who is, what up? What do you want? Who is this? That would be in some sense a violation. If you answer the phone sort of like aggressively, that's in some sense violating the rituals that we understand are supposed to surround even that kind of basic sort of thing. You raise your hand to speak in class. That's a ritual that we do, right? So thinking about ritual in this kind of very, very broad sense, Confucius thinks that one of the ways that you, A, develop kind of your inner resources and your virtue, and B, importantly, perform your social roles properly is by paying tons and tons of attention to ritual in this broad sense. So Confucius suggests that one should try thinking of everything one does in society as participation in ritual, to behave in public business as if you were receiving an important guest, to employ the people as if you were assisting at a great sacrifice. Okay, so very, very broad sense of ritual. And ritual is absolutely central. So partly why I told you all that stuff is to help to explain why ritual is absolutely central to Confucius's notion of social harmony and inner development, living the good life. Ritual is how you properly relate to yourself and the world, how you properly situate yourself in reality. Yeah. Specifically, go ahead.
So he's basically saying rituals and societal norms are synonymous.
Something like that. That you can understand any social interaction in terms of ritual. So you in an actual formal, there's lots of like specific formal rituals in Confucianism where you practice a bunch of kind of like inner states and outer behavior of being respectful, being serious, being careful. You do things with kind of like a lot of mindfulness and care. And what he's saying is those skills can translate out into even the mundane, everyday social interactions in which we participate. He's not the word ritual means the kind of relatively formalized ones, but he's saying if one of the connection between kind of like general virtue and performing these formalized rituals is the stuff that you're working on by doing a careful formal ritual is applicable to every social interaction that you perform, and kind of everything that you do can be seen through that same lens. It's a training ground where you can develop the care and the attention and the seriousness and the sense of awe in which your whole life can be framed. I do think that I was not raised religious in any fashion, and I do kind of feel that missing from my life. There aren't a whole lot of rituals that I was raised with that I take seriously. Weddings and funerals are kind of it for me. That's all I kind of got, and I do sort of feel the lack of them, and I do feel this sort of sense that nobody taught me how to take life seriously in some sense. That it's engaging seriously with my life and my interactions is something that I wish I did have a little more training in that. Maybe not to the degree that Confucius wanted me to have, but a little more than I got, where what I got was kind of like irony-poisoned cable TV from the 90s and not much seemed, a cesspool of nihilism, cultural nihilism and all that stuff. Maybe a little more kind of ritual would have been helpful for my sense of myself and all that stuff. Okay. All right. So to the topic. So with that that was all by way of introduction. Now to the central topic: the relationship between Confucianism and animals. Specifically, Ruping wants to consider those that involve animal sacrifice. Generally speaking, animals prefer not to be sacrificed, as I understand it. They certainly act that way. And nonetheless, Confucius advocates for an attitude of love and care towards animals. So they probably don't like being sacrificed. We're told, Confucius says, love and care for animals. How do we square that circle? That's the topic. Yeah. So, and here's so Rupin quotes this passage from the Mengzi, the Mencius, and it sort of lays out the intellectual structure that he's going to use to try to sort this out. How do you reconcile a requirement for a bunch of rituals involve animal sacrifice, or even like he says, if you have guests over and you don't serve them some kind of meat, that's the kind of like relatively mundane, less formalized, but it's still sort of like the social ritual is somebody comes over to your house, somebody visits you from far away, you're supposed to offer them at least some kind of meat, which obviously, again, the animals probably prefer that you didn't do that. So how do we reconcile those things? Okay, so from Mengzi, from Mencius. A virtuous man is caring towards non-human animals, but is not benevolent towards them. He's benevolent towards people, but is not devoted to them. He's devoted to his parents, but is merely benevolent towards people. He's benevolent towards people, but he's merely caring towards non-human animals. So there's a kind of differentiated love, you might say. A kind of differentiated love is being advocated for here. In what Ruping argues is that these are not just the same thing differing by degree, but these are different kinds of attitudes, qualitatively different kinds of care, and that each kind of care has its appropriate circle of application. And this is not at the time a universal view. By the time Mencius is writing, this is not a universal view. So this is as opposed to the school of Moists. So the Moists and other alternatives kind of philosophy at the same time advocate for a kind of undifferentiated universal love, so that you should love everybody with the same intensity as you love with your parents. If you don't like your parents, you should still love people a lot. Is the point? So there's a at least it's mildly controversial view here, or at least it's not a cultural given that this is the right way of thinking about care and love and respect and all that. Okay, so 3 kind of tiers of care. You're supposed to care about non-human animals. You're not supposed to like wantonly injure them for no reason. You're supposed to look after them. You're supposed to feel something for them. And care in this context is an internal state. It's something that you have inside of you. You want them to feel okay. You don't want them to suffer. You're sad when they feel injury. So this is advocated for. But you're not supposed to be benevolent towards them. And here benevolence is sometimes also translated as humanity, which sort of gives away the game, right? Humanity implies humans. Humanity, benevolence, these are significantly more, let's say, refined versions of the same thing. And then you are devoted to your parents. So devotion here is, we saw the failure of, you're supposed to be, benevolence involves things like, for example, not breaking the laws. Don't go around stealing people's stuff. Don't steal their sheeps, for example. That's a violation of benevolence. But we saw in this example of the guy who turned in his own father, that's a failure of devotion. So he's doing benevolence. He's successfully acted through benevolence, which is like, don't break the laws and like try to not to steal people's stuff. But he's failed in devotion. You're supposed to have a special place in your life, in your heart for your parents, and specifically, presumably your parents are also supposed to do the same for you. Okay. Is that So there's a hierarchy of types of care here, and specifically, there's a distinction between A, your family and non-family, and B, humans and non-humans. Yeah? Okay. So, and there's a kind of argument for this, which is that what humans get, or sorry, what humans should get is something like reverence or awe, jing, reverence or deep respect, and this maybe it could require some unpacking because awe, I don't. It's odd to say that I stand in awe of the guy who sat beside me on the subway. I didn't even make eye contact with him, but I'm supposed to have awe towards him. What do you mean, Confucius? So this is one of those points. Have any of you read some of the Analects? Confucius writing, like little bits and pieces? It's good reading. It requires kind of reading and rereading. But if you dig in there, you will find shockingly little about ghosts, spirits, the afterlife, metaphysics. He's really not interested in that kind of thing. Somebody asked him once how am I supposed to relate to spirits? And he's like, you can't even relate to people. Get that sorted out, and then we can talk about spirits maybe. It's not a frivolous question because in the rituals where you're doing kind of ancestor sacrifices to your ancestors, the real original versions of this involve days of fasting and kind of bathing in ritual purification, and then bringing up as much of the face and voice and features and character of the ancestors you possibly can, and then at least a little bit you're supposed to sense the presence, faintly, dimly, the presence of the ancestor while you're doing this. So encounters with non-living spirits are supposed to be fairly commonplace. It's not like this is something that is outside of somebody's direct lived experience. But Confucius, nonetheless, doesn't super duper want to talk about that. He kind of, the world's on fire. It's the Warring State period. A lot is going wrong in society. And I think there's extremely reasonable for him to be like, let's just try to get society sorted out. And then maybe we can worry about spirits. But nonetheless, he lives in this context where the notion that there are spirits of your ancestors and that you have some kind of relationship to them was extremely widespread. This is not something Confucius comes up with. This is a very, Confucius is like 400 BCE. At that point, this belief was extremely old and extremely widespread. You see in like the oldest archaeological sites in China, and in China that means really friggin' old. You see stuff like burial and reburial. So you bury your auntie died and you bury her, and then once the bones are sort of like cleaned of the flesh, you dig up the bones and kind of like lay them out really neatly. You see evidence of burial and reburial, that kind of thing, which strongly suggests people have been in this in the kind of area of China. People have been keenly interested in their ancestors for an extremely long time. Okay, and the notion that you've got some connection to the past through them is sort of taken for granted. Okay, so this is Confucius doesn't super want to talk about this, but it's in his cultural context, and the little bits that he does talk about try to explain why you might want to have awe or reverence for other human beings, and actually yourself as well. It's because if you follow that chain of ancestors back far enough, you get to a kind of something semi-divine. So this is from Ruiping. The Confucian understanding is that our original ancestors were generated by heaven, the ultimate reality as noble beings who are as close to the gods of heaven and the spirit, who are close to the gods of heaven and spirits of the earth. Our ancestors exist as the most spiritual form of humans, watching over the fates and lives of us, their descendants. So this is why we're supposed to have this sense of awe for not just other humans, not just impressive humans, but all of us. All of us are in some sense descended from beings who were higher than us, more spiritual than us, more godlike than us. And that's why you should have awe for this sense of reverence for your parents. They are your connection to that. But you're also supposed to have that sense for your kids, because they are likewise a product of that kind of chain to the deep past. And for yourself, because you are also a link in that chain from the most perfected version of humanity to the present. You're supposed to, when you participate in these rituals that do ancestor worship, you're supposed to be having that's your connection to this thing that goes all the way back into the dawn of time, back when we were good and whole and beings of light. So that's why, how am I supposed to have awe? I don't know how many of you hang out with toddlers a lot. It's hard to generate awe for a 3-year-old. They're constantly sticky. They're trying to harm themselves and destroy everything around them. It is challenging to generate a sense of awe, other than like, I can't believe you did that. But nonetheless, Confucianism asks us to say, this is a person. This person has a chain of connections all the way back to the beginning when we were good. So Ruiping says the humans carry on and represent something essential that is worthy of awe and reverence from their ancestors. In this respect, in terms of their moral status, they cannot be totally separated from their ancestors. If humans should revere their ancestors, they should also revere themselves and other humans. So, talking about this hierarchy of types of kind of care. There's the love that you're supposed to give to non-human animals. There's the benevolence you're supposed to have towards basically all humans, but then the devotion to your specific parents and your specific sort of lineage, because your parents and lineage are the direct route to this kind of like ancestors, and the other humans are connected. You can recognize their connection to it, but they're not your personal direct route to it. Okay, and then I guess my reading of this is animals don't have that. Animals don't have that. This is where the kind of reticence for discussing metaphysical stuff is inconvenient for me as a philosopher. I had a lot of trouble finding kind of like bold metaphysical claims. Aristotle loves doing this stuff. Well, next week we'll do a little Aristotle. Aristotle makes metaphysical claims all over the place. These texts seem to have much less of it. But in his cultural context, the cultural context of Confucius, there's a belief in something like a soul, actually more than one soul, at minimum 2 souls, the Hun and the Po. So the Hun is a kind of like light spiritual soul. After your death, it rises up to heaven, heaven being the kind of like the source of everything. And then the Po soul goes down to the earth after death, and is sometimes called the animal or vegetative soul. So let me, I would like to, I tried this in one of my other classes, and I got a really good response. I'm going to set a bounty. My impression, I want to first of all admit my ignorance and then ask you to help me fill this ignorance. My impression is humans have the Hun soul and the Po soul, but animals only have the Po soul. I have not found somebody specifically and explicitly saying that. So the first one of you who can bring me a source, a scholarly source that says that gets a bonus mark. Equivalent to having one of your questions accepted into the tutorial and discussion questions. I didn't spend all day looking for this, but I spent a good while trying to find an academic source that talks about, do animals have Po souls? Or sorry, Hun souls. They have Po souls. That's the one that sort of operates your senses and lets you grow and breathe and move around and stuff. But the Hun soul is like your kind of like intellectual, your wit, the sharpness of mind. There are some stories about people who, when you're losing it a little bit, it's a loss or damage to your Hun soul. There are a few stories of animals who seem to have at least a little Hun. For example, foxes, who are notoriously clever, that kind of thing. But my impression is, I cannot back this up with a source. Humans all have the Hun and Po. Mostly animals just have the Po. But if anyone can find me a good source on that, I'll get you a bonus mark. Yeah.
Didn't you just tell us that there's a source that talks about a fox with
Yeah. But that's different than saying that generally speaking animals have the Hun soul. That's different. So there can be exceptional circumstances where some animal gets a little bit of it, but not to the degree that we do. Yeah.
Doesn't that mean if they get a little bit of it, they start with none of it? Usually they don't have it.
These are good questions, and I don't really have the answer to them. It's the sources that Confucius is not the only one who doesn't spend a whole lot of time clarifying this. It's like, I don't know if you read like Brandon Sanderson style fantasy where they do a whole bunch of like world building and like magical systems. Generally speaking, this literature is not interested in doing this. It's more like Tolkien. It's more like a show don't tell. And I want the world, I want the like D&D style rules of this thing, which is mostly just absent from the text. So yeah, that sounds about right to me, but it's what I'm doing is making inferences about what's believed rather than having somebody say kind of explicitly. But there might be, so in this sense, I suspect a metaphysical distinction between humans and animals here, that we've got a different kind of soul than they have. We have one of the same kinds of souls, but also a different kind. And this is what makes in some sense, the link between us and our heavenly ancestors possible, whereas they don't have that. It's what qualifies all humans for benevolence, but animals only for this lower level of care. I think. Yeah. I don't know. So, what about animals? It's clear that they're considered to be on a different moral level than humans. That they are considered to be somehow less morally important than us. Yeah. Exactly why is somewhat less clear. Okay. Questions? I should say, there's a bunch of different versions of this Hun and Po soul thing. The Taoists think that there's like, oh god, the numbers have lost me. There's several Hun souls and Po souls. I think it's maybe 2 Hun and 7 Po, something like that. There's a variety of views on this. And again, Confucius is far too practical to bother with this, again, D&D style world building silliness that I'm so invested in. He just wants to figure out how to live in a society. But yeah, I think if you want to, from the kind of like, I'm a philosopher interested in metaphysics. I think if you want to understand why it is that humans get reverence and animals get mere kind of respect or care, or sorry, not respect, but like care or love or something like this, it might be that the Hun soul is what makes it so that we have connections to our heavenly ancestors. I don't know. It doesn't matter too much. But okay, let's take a break. Let's take 10. And we'll talk a little bit about how this plays out for animals. I got two questions during the break about just further feedback on your essays. My preferred method of you getting in touch about that is just emailing me. If you come to office hours, I'll just have to sit there and read silently for like 5 or 10 minutes and think really hard and ignore you, which is probably not the best use of all of our time. But if you email me and say, hi, I would just like more information about my essay and how I did, then I can respond to you as soon as I can, but I can take my time to read it and think about it and stuff like that. And then if we have an email conversation and you're like, I still want to talk more about this, then we can talk in person, and I can already have sort of like read it and thought about it. So that's my preference is, if you just want more information and or to argue with me, maybe ask for more information first. It's a better look. A little advice on disputing your paper. Ask for further information first, and then you can go for the kill. But I have a long history of enjoying arguing with people a little too much. I'll try to keep it reasonable, but yeah. And I will say, if you formally, so asking for information is fine. Asking for a regrade is the sort of next step. And if I regrade it, it is theoretically possible that your mark could go up or stay the same or go down. I don't make any promises about the direction of change. I just sort of like read it fresh. It's very rare for it to actually go down, but I find that noting the possibility makes people at least think seriously about whether they want me to look at it again. Yeah. Good. Okay, so yeah, email me. If you want more feedback, email me. Okay. All right, so what about animals in all of this? The basic idea, regardless of how it sort of shakes out in terms of souls or anything like that, is animals are supposed to be on a different moral level than us. There's Ruping's argument is there's a qualitatively different kind of relationship that we're supposed to have with animals. Devotion to your parents, benevolence to all humans, love or care towards animals. We should care about animals. We should consider their lives valuable and important. But if you're sacrificing something, you don't get any points for sacrificing something you don't care about. That's not a sacrifice. And universal, the notion of sacrificing something is extremely common across cultures and across history. And universally, people understand that sacrifice means sacrificing something that you care about. So actually sacrificing animals doesn't contradict the fact that you care about them. That actually requires that you think that they are at least important, if not actually worthy of like care and concern. Okay. But I think it's interesting to see that there's some nuances here. This notion that your moral obligations track your relationships applies also to animals. So there's a passage in the Book of Rites where Confucius had a dog and the dog died. And he's just talking about what to do about that. And he goes through like appropriate ways to bury a dog. He says, if you've got worn out curtains, you could bury a horse in them. If you've got an umbrella, you can bury your dog in that. I'm too poor to have an umbrella, but like here's what you can use a blanket or something like this. There's sort of like, in some sense, ritual ways of dealing with burying the dog. And at the same time, he's fine with killing and eating other animals. So there's a sense in which, I don't want to call it unfairness, but there's a difference, isn't there, between how you treat your close, suppose you're like your family and have a good relationship with them. I know not everybody does, but whoever you're close with, you treat them differently than random strangers, right? You treat the people that you love differently than random strangers. If my sister comes to me for help, I will drop pretty much everything to do that. If a rando comes to me for help, I'm like, I do what I can, but I'm not going to mobilize nearly the same kind of resources for that. And this appears to follow also for animals. Like I'm not, as I said at the beginning of the course, I'm not a vegetarian. I eat meat. I don't think I'm awesome for doing that, but I do it. And yet, I wouldn't eat, my neighbors have a dog, and I probably wouldn't eat Scruffy. I've had various cats as pets through my life. I would rather starve than eat my cats. I've had special bonds, special relationships with a few animals in my life, and that qualifies them in my mind for special moral status, special treatment. And what we've seen through, I mean, for the utilitarians, that's a kind of moral error, right? You're supposed to treat, when we talked about the Ascent Project, we talked about utilitarianism, you're supposed to treat all suffering and all happiness as equal. And it's just kind of, the problem was that humans are sort of anthropocentric, and we take ourselves to be the center of the universe, and we don't pay attention to kinds of sentience that also have suffering and happiness. It's supposed to be an utterly equal playing field. And okay, so here's two things that are not necessarily related. I don't act like that. I treat people who I have special relationships with and animals that I have special bonds with much different than I treat random people. You as one of my students, this is a kind of relationship that we have. You can ask me for more than randos on the street. If or even like, God forbid, some like York student comes and asks me for something. Like, I don't know you anything. But you're in one of my classes. So I do consider that I owe you something more than I would owe them. And this, for Confucius, this applies also to animals. You kill an ox and sacrifice it and maybe eat part of it, but you if you worked with a horse on a farm or have a dog as a pet, that's a different kind. Your relationship with that animal is different, and therefore they qualify for different kinds of treatment. I don't think it ever rises to the level where you should have this kind of reverential awe for animals. They don't ever get that, but there's nonetheless, within the realm of care, you might have significant differences in what you owe to various animals. So there's this bit in Mencius again. Mencius is talking to a king. He's just trying to convince. This is the kind of thing Confucians would do. They go around and try to convince very powerful people to like give half a crap about their subjects. Like, hey, have you ever considered being kind of nice to the people you're ruling over? I think it might go better for you. And they would go, I don't know, it doesn't sound right to me. But so Mencius is doing this. He's trying to convince a king that he should act compassionately towards his own subject. And he brings up this time that the king, there was an ox being taken to slaughter, and it was crying and lowing, and it wasn't happy about this. It didn't want to be slaughtered. And the king felt pity and said, don't kill that ox. And the attendant said, oh, should we cancel the ritual? And he's like, no, take a sheep instead. And like, okay, so Mencius says, you saw the ox and had not seen the sheep. So is the virtuous man affected towards animals that, having seen them alive, he can't bear to see them die. Having heard their dying cries, he can't bear to eat their flesh. Therefore, he keeps away from his kitchen. I don't know. I hope that I've laid the groundwork for you to see what he's on about there. You might. Does that make sense now? Is that a reasonable thing to say? I don't know. You can push back on Mencius if you want. Yeah.
You're not just saying that seeing an animal automatically means you have a relationship with that animal, regardless of the context you're seeing it in?
So he's saying, I think he's not saying that always happens, but he's saying that is certainly a possibility. If you see the ox, if you hear its cries, it might arouse pity in you. And being virtuous, you should respond to your sense of compassion and pity. If something wells up inside of you and you feel like, oh man, I really feel bad for this ox, that is a virtuous thing to do, is to pay attention to that. And that was aroused in this king because of this direct contact he has with the animal. Now, animals don't get to have the same moral status as humans, so if he didn't hear the ox, then he's not going against his own sense of compassion. Then Mencius would certainly say you should sacrifice an animal. Mencius is a good Confucian. He'd say you should sacrifice an animal in this in rituals. So he's just saying, like, there's a danger of if you have a relationship with the animal, you might feel pity for it, which would get in the way of your higher responsibilities. So stay out of the kitchen, is his advice. It's not that it always has, but there's the danger or potential for it to have that to cause that to happen to you. And this, he's sort of like trying to navigate this, like, you are supposed to have this sense of compassion and pity for animals, but you're also supposed to sacrifice them, so maybe don't get too attached to the, don't give it a name or something. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's, and just, so it's just like having, you know, like I'm not gonna, I'll eat a burger, but I'll pet the cat. It's precisely against this kind of universalism. And I don't, yeah. Again, it's, I think for those of us who kind of grew up in this kind of like universalist, you know, individualist, implicitly utilitarian culture, this might be like, oh, what? That's hypocritical. But the idea is that it's not. It's specific to your relationship. So again, when we think Confucian ethics is largely framed in terms of relationships. Your ethical obligations stem from your social relationships, which, you know, if you've got a different relationship to different animals, you might owe them different things. You might owe them different things. Yeah, it's certainly not universal. Yeah. 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 I don't know. I don't know. That was not clarified. Maybe then another ox would just remind him too much of that ox. I don't know. It's a good question, and I don't have a good answer. Yeah. Mm-mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I don't think I can clarify any further for you exactly what was going on there. And I think Mencius's argument would have worked even if the king had just substituted one ox for another. That would be fine. It might have just been a sheep for illustrative purposes. That's a good question. I don't exactly know where the sheep is coming from in this context. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could be that in this sense it's less about your specific relationship with that ox and more about the feeling of pity that rises up and the Confucian injunction to like cultivate that, like pay attention to that. That's an important thing and the thing that you should care about. So if one ox sets it off, then it's like, yeah, I'm going to automatically apply it to all oxen. Maybe the sheep is better or something like that. Yeah. I don't think I have a satisfying answer for that. Yeah.
So you said that giving in to those sense of pity or whatever to those animals is virtuous. But what about a person who doesn't have any towards any animals? Is that person then not virtuous, even though they're not giving in to any desire because they don't have a desire?
That's right. So yeah, I think that person is not, well, okay, so not that I think this, but I think the Confucian view was if you don't have a kind of basic care, if you don't, so again, benevolence is the thing we're supposed to have towards humans. Benevolence and devotion are both inner states and relational states. They're supposed to be like things you feel and things you do at the same time. Whereas care is just an inner state. It's just something that you feel. And sometimes you are supposed to override it. You are supposed to say, well, too bad. I kind of like this ox, but we got to sacrifice it. So here we go. But I think Confucius would say that if you have no sense of care for animals, you are in some sense less virtuous than somebody who does. There's blatant anti-socio and psychopath discrimination, but it was old times. Yeah. No, he's very prescriptive notions of how your life and inner world are supposed to be. And part of why he puts so much education or so much emphasis on education as one of the, like, his world is on fire, and he says what we need to be doing is educating the heck out of people. And one of the reasons he wants to do that is he thinks quite a lot of what it means to be a good person has to be trained up in you. It doesn't come automatically. It has to be trained up. His disciples sort of differ on this. One of them says you're born bad and you have to become good. One of them says you're born good and you only sometimes become bad. But Confucius in general is very, very hot on the idea that, yeah, you need some of these kind of inner reactions trained. And if you didn't come with any sense that like animals need, I don't know, if you just like reflexively and automatically smack dogs and throw rocks at cats, and that might, I don't know, I might now, so that was what Confucius thinks. I might now endorse the idea that that's less virtuous than like having some sense of like, these are living beings who deserve something. Again, I'll probably eat meat sometime today, but okay. Okay. So throughout this reading, Ruiping talks about Confucianism as a kind of virtue ethics. That is telling people what kind of people we should be, and I certainly think that that's reasonable. I think that that's a good take, and I mean, insofar as the translation is accurate, Confucius talks quite a lot about virtue specifically. So, but there's do you remember virtue ethics? We talked a little bit about Philippa Foot's natural goodness. A little bit, yeah. Okay, so one way of reading Confucius is as presenting a kind of virtue ethics. I think another way of reading him is as a kind of ethics of care. And what I mean by that is sort of ethics surrounded by ethics. I've used this phrase a few times now. Ethics grounded in relationships and context. So I get this term from 20th, 21st century school feminist ethics. So feminist ethics of care says essentially this. Your primary ethical responsibilities are grounded in your primary human relationships. And that we should make ethical judgments in a specific context. So this is the attempt, the explicit goal of this is to push back against things like very universal perspectives of utilitarianism or deontological ethics. So utilitarianism says all people are equal, or all sentient beings are equal, your concern must be distributed equally among them. Deontological ethics says there's rules that you must always follow. You know, thou shalt not kill. Those are just rules, and you must always follow those rules. So one of those is a kind of universalist thing. It doesn't care about your relationships. One of them is a kind of universal generalizations, rules that are supposed to be always true. And feminist ethics of care aims to sort of push back in both of those fronts and say, you should probably treat the people that you love differently than strangers. That makes sense, actually. And you should think about things in a context, in a specific context, rather than in universal terms, rules that are supposed to apply to everyone all the time. Now, you will be unsurprised to hear the feminist ethics of care do not endorse Confucius's notion that we should all do whatever our father says. That is not what they think. They have a much more flexible notion of which are the relationships that matter. So Confucius is very explicitly patriarchal. And the father, patriarch of the family, has the same relationship to the ruler as sort of the son does to the father, kind of thing. Feminist ethics of care, I suppose they can say that is sometimes okay, but also that there's a whole bunch of other ways that those relationships should be configured. So I think you can read, I think you can read Confucius as, and feminist ethics of care as two versions of this care ethics. That is, ethics grounded in not what kind of person we want to be, but what kinds of how you should act in your human relationships. Can you be ethical on a desert island? Like if you were the last human, can you be ethical or unethical? And I think the ethics of care would go like, nah, that doesn't really apply anymore. Maybe a little, but like mostly what ethics is about is how you treat other people or other sentient beings more broadly. Okay, so this is, I think this fits really nicely with the notion of Confucius not approving of a son squealing on his father for stealing the sheep, and that is precisely what the feminist ethics of care people talk about in the sense of like, look, you shouldn't steal, like, here's a universalist rule, don't steal sheep. And I think Confucius would go, yeah, mostly don't steal sheep. But he would also say, we heard him say, don't turn in your father. And one of those takes precedent over the other. And this also makes sense of the notion that he might want his dog buried with a certain care, but might not care all that much about a random dog on the street, because he has a different set of relationships with those two animals. Okay. Good. We're gonna finish a little early today, but that's all right. One more swing at this. Let me try this idea. So I want to contrast. I want to contrast Confucius with a utilitarian. So this is Peter Singer. He's got this 1971 essay, Famine, Affluence, and Morality. And it's a kind of like very controversial. It's an annoying paper because he takes a bunch of like seemingly very plausible premises and comes up with a pretty wild conclusion. So premises are something like, it's bad to let people starve to death. Good with that? Bad to let people starve to death? Good, okay. Second premise, it doesn't matter whether the person starving to death is right beside you or across the world. It says, this is the one I've quoted here. It makes no moral difference whether the person I can help is a neighbor's child 10 yards from me or a Bengali woman whose name I shall never know 10,000 miles away. If you accept those, Peter Singer thinks, what you should do is give away, if there's a famine anywhere in the world, you should give away almost all of your money until you're about as hungry as the people in that famine. It's morally wrong. So this is really simple utilitarian stuff, right? It doesn't matter whether the suffering is in me or in you or in somebody 10,000 miles away. That's irrelevant, morally speaking. The job is to reduce the total amount of suffering in the world. The most moral activity is the one that creates the most happiness and the least suffering. And we're not keeping track of whose head that suffering is happening in. So, there are hungry people in the world. I have more than $0. Actually, I have less than $0 in my bank account, but I got good credit. The bank would give me more money if I asked them. Therefore, I have a moral obligation to take on as much debt as I can until I am maybe not famine level hungry, but like pretty hungry, decently hungry. Because there are people who live with less than me. Yeah. So if I'm, well, no, Singer's, the conclusion he comes to is quite radical. He's like, you should, if this person's starving to death, and I have to give away so much that I'm like hungry every day, but I'm not starving to death, then I should. Oh, well, no, because my suffering matters too. Yeah, my suffering matters too. In utilitarianism, everybody's suffering matters equally. I shouldn't make myself like starve to death either. That's also bad. But if I can help, I mean, like I'm reasonably, I'm not like rich or anything, but like the amount of money I have access to could feed quite a few people in poorer parts of the world right now. And I generally don't do that. And Peter Singer saying, that's morally wrong of me. Yeah.
Is he saying that seriously, or is he being rhetorical?
No, he's dead serious. 100% serious.
Wouldn't Confucius say that there's just no relationship between me and that person 10,000 miles away, so why bother?
He would say that those are different. Yeah, he would say it makes no moral difference. Confucius would say, yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
I just looked up that he only donates 10% of his income.
Yeah. You know, when you give ethics, when you test how ethical ethics professors are, they're about average. They're about average. It's not yeah. Now, you can, I've stood in front of this very class and be like, I don't think it's morally defensible for me to eat factory farm meat, but here we go. It doesn't make me wrong about whether it's morally defensible or not, right? His argument could be perfectly good even if it's a hypocrite. A 2-pack-a-day smoker can be like, don't smoke, kids, it's terrible for you. They're still right? That's still correct. So whether he's following his own moral dicta is not beside the point. I think thank you for telling me, that's a funny fact. But you said that, but also it doesn't necessarily make him wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of have an argument against this, which is a bit strange, but like I do believe that we should donate to help people in other countries, especially their family.
Sure.
But for example, I don't know, because I think they moved into this in the 80s. Like, do you know We Are the World?
Yep.
Like during that was a whole thing to raise families in like my country, Ethiopia.
Mhm.
There's always a bunch of singers. But the really funny thing during all that is that a lot of the aid money ended up being diverted by the Americans to support rebel groups in the country. In a lot of cases, aid money isn't just sent towards
Yep.
purchase goods.
Yep.
It's used for political means. People do receive it eventually.
Yep. Yep.
They don't receive what we intend to give them as a whole.
Yep.
A lot of times they just get smuggled. And in one BBC report, they interviewed one of the rebels and eventually formed the government who stated like out of the $100 million that was raised for it, that he claimed that like 95% went to the rebel group. Using the same amount, especially because like Fed didn't.
That's wild. Yep, that's wild. Yeah. So Singer's argument if Singer's argument certainly doesn't entail that you should just blindly throw money at anybody who's asking for it. It does require that you have some rational belief that the money's going to actually help people. And your story tells me that simply donating is not by no means a guarantee. You'd want to have it sort of like, you know, a chain of custody for where money goes and who's getting it and all that stuff. Yeah, good. Yeah.
My slight pushback on that would be that, okay, then let's assume that you find a perfect charity. Are you then morally obligated to donate everything to them?
Yep. Well, okay, so Singer says yes. Singer says yes. And Confucius would say, oh man, I got a kid. I got a family. I got relatives who need my help. I got people I know and care about and have relationships with, and my responsibilities to them are proportionate to the degree of relationship I have to them. That's the argument, at least. Yeah.
I read this online once, but somebody equated this with, let's say you're walking down the road and you're wearing a jacket that's kind of expensive,
Mm-hmm.
and you see a kid drowning.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know the kid, then you're not morally obligated to save it if it ruins your jacket.
Right. Yes. Yes. So this is the type of argument that Singer's grappling with here is exactly that. Yeah. The cost of a really nice jacket could feed a lot of people in poorer parts of the world, assuming it actually gets to them. But if you like had a nice like bespoke sports coat, that's a lot of food for a lot of people. And me saying that I'd rather have the sport coat than feed people is pretty much equivalent of seeing a drowning child and going like, I'm not going to get in there, ruin my jacket. Ruin my jacket. Yeah. 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 So this bind that you're feeling is precisely how people responded to Singer, being like, "Really? Is this all on me? Like, does it have to be me?" kind of thing. The way that this so this is from the 70s. One way that this develops is the effective altruist movement. Have you heard of these guys? The effective altruists are like, it's very popular in kind of like rationalist Silicon Valley circles. They're like, okay, utilitarianism says it doesn't matter whose mind it is, suffering and happiness is a thing. And then they make the further step to say, well, it doesn't matter if it's now or a million years from now. those should be weighted equally as well. So what you should do is go work for the most morally reprehensible, fintech company that you can find. You should step on homeless people to get to your job faster, to make 1% more money, and then donate it to somebody who's going to build AI a little bit faster, to build rockets to get us into space, so that instead of 100 million people in the future, there can be 101 million people. That's the rational thing to do. This is people with a lot of money think. This Sam Bankman-Fried, remember this guy who got nabbed for financial fraud? That was his kind of basic worldview. It's like, I'd steal as much money as you can and then give it to causes that will get us into space. That's the way to go. So you can get real weird rabbit holes if you follow this all the way through. Okay, one more and then we'll move on from this. So, yeah.
It's not really a question, but it seems like a totally like justification to moral wrongdoing. Like, how can you prove that he actually believes that?
Prove that who believes that? Oh, Bankman-Fried? Yeah. No, it is a convenient cover for the step one, get me personally as much money as possible. Like, I have follow-up questions. Yeah. Okay. So to bring this back to the topic of this course, what does this say about farmed animals? So I get my meat mostly from the grocery store. I try to go, there's a place that sells like Mennonite raised meat that I try to go to when I think of it. There are vegetarians who say the following: you should be able to look that cow in the eye and kill it yourself. And if you can't do that, you don't deserve to eat meat. And I have some sympathy for that point of view. Like, not that long ago, 200 years or something like that, that would have pretty much been the way things were. If I had a cow that, I don't want to know the name of the cow that I'm eating. That is not a thing that appeals to me. But is that moral cowardice? Am I just being a wimp? Maybe. Some people nod, yeah, you're just being a wimp. No, maybe. But again, what would, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Well, I think that sort of like pictures us as if it were 200 years ago. But I think it's kind of more complex now with like animals, like where we get our meat from isn't some like nice farmer with some big like pasture that the cows are facing, and then one day he shoots, and it's like the animals are suffering for like their entire lives until they're finally killed.
Yeah.
So I feel like that sort of brings this discussion a little like more than the surface level.
So, good.
If we apply it to today.
So let's say let's just take as given factory farming is awful. Does anyone want to come to bat for factory farming? Anyone? Going? Don't put your hand down. Okay. Let's take it as given for this conversation. Factory farming is a moral atrocity. What about, okay, so the Mennonite farms, it's like people in a relatively low-tech context with relatively high, it's not fun being a cow, but I don't think it's ever fun being a cow. Anyway, so suppose that is a relatively high welfare context. Should I be able to look that cow in the eye? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And a lot of people like think it's disgusting or they think it's cruel. And I just think you think that because you can see the head. And if anything, I would argue that it's more ethical to eat that because the duck was technically never alive.
Right. Yeah. It's
People are uncomfortable seeing a head of an animal. And I think a lot of people are
That sounds right.
It's kind of like a respect thing. Like if you know you're going to eat meat, you should have the self-awareness knowing that we're like that. And I think when you're consuming meat, you should always try and have meat that you know is ethically sourced.
Relatively more ethical. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Compared to factory
Yeah,
farming. And
yeah.
I think it's just like morally like it just you just can't eat something that suffered its whole life.
Yeah, yeah,
Also, it
yeah.
tastes good.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Good, good. Yeah, I grew up in Belleville, Ontario, land of chicken nuggets and fries. And when I first came to Toronto and saw the ducks hanging in the Chinese food restaurants, I'm like, is that allowed? Are they allowed to do that? I can see that it's an animal. I got used to it, but it took a minute. Sorry, I saw your hand.
Wouldn't with respect to killing an animal you're eating yourself
Yeah.
in the eye,
Yeah.
wouldn't Confucius say that that's, if you were to do that every single time and feel bad about it every single time, that's wrong because you're not giving in to your feeling of pity?
So yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Or it's suboptimal. You're not necessarily supposed to give in to the feeling of pity or care. You can. It's not morally wrong to you're preparing an animal for sacrifice, and you're like, poor animal. That's not morally wrong. So it's not that you always have to act on the feeling of love or whatever. It's that you are nonetheless supposed to maintain it. What would be wrong is if you do it every day and eventually you feel nothing. Whatever. So losing that sense of having any feeling for the animal is supposed to be, in a sense, morally wrong because you're supposed to have love for the animal. Being numbed to it would be a failure to have that kind of inner experience. So yeah, I think he would say like you're morally better off if somebody else kills your sacrificial animal. Yeah, luck of the draw. Oh, okay, lots of hands. Okay, yeah.
I mean, I feel like the concept of killing your own food and eating it, it's not wrong. It's just natural. And I feel like in the sense of because we live in the West, we don't privilege not to do that. Like for example, when I went back home, I killed chickens I helped raise there.
Oh wow.
And it's a unique experience. Like I'm just saying something that happens. It's just very casual. Like my grandmother wanted all of her grandkids to do it. My brother didn't have a chance to do it because he didn't want to, so I did it for him. And my sister was 25 at the time, so she couldn't really do it, so I did it for her as well. I did it for her, yeah. And then like doing it, it kind of feels weird. It's like, oh, like I raised these chickens and now I'm gonna eat them. But I kind of enjoyed the experience in the sense that I got to experience the full cycle.
Yeah.
The raising of it, the killing
Yeah.
of it, the consuming of it. It's almost circular. And then when I die, it can eat me or it's
That's very generous.
watch The Lion King.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Thanks. Yeah. That's right. There's a bunch of hands. Yeah.
I think that one opposite perspective we looked at a few weeks ago was like sort of the Anishinaabe worldview on like animals.
Yeah.
Like to them, it is a lot of importance placed on like, kind of what you were saying, the relationship you have with the animal.
Yeah.
And like I'm vegetarian, I don't really like have a personal experience with this, but from my perspective, I think that's a lot more ethical than saying to have a good relationship with an animal, you can't eat it.
Yeah.
Because the Anishinaabe worldview kind of would lead to better treatment of the animal, and therefore, like, if
Potentially.
we're looking at a utilitarianism point of view, it would kind of result in greatest good for both sides.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. And you and then yeah. Yes, please.
So like obviously the vegan or vegetarian diet is like possible if you're possibly living a healthy, high protein that.
Yep.
But that's also not like for sure like the case for everyone. And
Yep.
like also depends on like where you are, like your economic, also like just like other health factors. So like what I wonder is like where does like your own like obligation to your body like and your own like survival, where is
Yep.
that more important than
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. What do you owe yourself? And maybe, hopefully, more than we all agree, more than nothing, right? Like you can't if you're worried about the cows, but you're not worried about yourself. That's you should think about that. Confucius thinks much more. You owe yourself much more than you owe the chickens and the cows. There's a qualitative difference there. Some people think that it's not. Some people think that it is not different in kind, but only different in degree. Some people think it's not even different in degree. So those are your options here. One more, and then yeah.
intrinsic, like, I guess, hunter-esque appeal of you being, you looking at killing it. I don't see the ethical connection between killing it yourself and having it killed. I can see the perspective that you should always vibe for ethical farming, but how that translates into you killing it yourself or it being killed by someone else, like how just being queasy or not can justify something you want to do.
I take it the argument is something like, if I can't stand to do it myself, that means that I consider it abhorrent, and what I'm doing is simply hiding some. All I'm doing by having somebody else kill my meat is hiding something abhorrent from myself. I think that's the argument. I think that's the view. That you should, if you're willing to participate in it, you should face the reality of it. And if you're not willing to face the reality, then you probably shouldn't do it. I think that's the argument. But that leaves out this Confucian notion that you might have differential responsibilities to things with whom you have a relationship and those with whom you don't. So it might be that you do have a relationship, you do have an obligation to say, make sure all of the chickens are treated okay, but you're better off letting somebody else kill your specific chicken most of the time, possibly. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I guess one of the reasons why, for example, my sister wouldn't do it as easily as I would is not necessarily because of the act of killing and feeling bad for the chicken, and also because of the fear of the blood,
Oh, yeah.
which is kind of the same reason why some people don't want to go into, say, becoming a doctor or a physician or things like that.
Yeah.
And so in that situation where you can't do it not because you don't think it's good, but more so because there's certain limitations.
That's true.
Fear of blood, for example.
Yeah.
How does that work into this argument? Is it because of the suffering and then what's for the greater good? Or how does it?
So that would be an argument for, so I feel sympathy for your sister. I get a little dizzy when I see too much blood. It freaks me out. Very, very soft upbringing. I think that's an argument to say, if you're causing suffering to a person, and if somebody else, so say you do it and your sister doesn't have to be freaked out, less overall suffering in the world. I think that's an argument for some people avoiding it. And it's not that she's thinks it's morally wrong, she just thinks it's gross. I would find doing surgery on somebody just horrifically gross. I think surgery is morally fine. So yeah, I think what you presented is an argument that it's perfectly fine for you to do it instead of her. Yeah. Okay. One last thought to communicate before we call it a day. Do we want to do this? I'll do it quickly. Okay, so suppose you do not in fact believe that you are descended from semi-divine ancestors. Suppose, like me, you believe that you are descended from something that looked pretty much like a chimpanzee. And before that, something that looked like a lemur. And before that, something else. One of the things that you might think that entails is a kind of ruthless selfishness. One of the things that evolutionary perspectives are often saddled with is the idea that it's everyone for themselves, and that it's us against you against the world. And I think that is a terrible, actually, misinterpretation of not even modern evolutionary theory, like mid-20th century evolutionary theory rejects that entirely. I'm saying this because it's mildly similar. I kept thinking of this while I was reading the Confucius material. I am not saying that this is the same idea as Confucianism. These are two different ideas. They're two different ideas. Just want to get that clear. But modern evolutionary theory has a really rich story about how cooperation works. In an ant colony, almost none of the ants reproduce. But natural selection is the drive to survive and reproduce, right? How does that work? How does natural selection act on ants that the workers never reproduce? How does that work? Why isn't their selfish drive to pass their genes on, why is that being overridden? Yeah.
The worker ants have to make life better for like the queen or the other ones that are going to reproduce, so that like the children that the queen will have would have had a better life because all the people like the ants like working to make where the colony was in a better place.
Yep. Good. And then the last step is the worker shares a bunch of genes with the queen. So this is the notion of kin selection. Mid 20th century addition to the kind of evolutionary theory. Evolution does not especially care whether I personally pass on my genes or whether, say, somebody related to me passes on their genes. Doesn't really make a difference. From the perspective of are these genes being passed along, that doesn't really make a whole lot of difference to evolution. The genes are identical. All it cares about is are these genes getting into the next generation. So if a worker ant helps the colony, it's never reproducing, but the queen shares enough of its genes to make it worth its while. So it is helping its genes get into the next generation, not its specific personal genes, but copies that are identical to it, close enough. So worker ants actually help improve their own fitness. Even though they have no possibility of ever reproducing, they are nonetheless raising their own fitness value by helping the queen and those who will reproduce with the queen. And this is a pretty straightforward explanation for cooperation amongst related animals. Yeah? If I help my sister, and my sister has 2 kids, if I help her, so I share about half of my genes with her, and they will share about quarter. My sister's kids have about a quarter identical genes with me. So like suppose she has 4 kids and I die to save 4 kids. In evolutionary terms, that's an even Steven. If I died to save 5 of my little nieces and nephews, then I'm up. I'm up and I beat the game. I beat the house. So yeah, anything you can do to increase the chances that your kin, people with whom you share genes, are going to get into the next generation, your fitness value also rises. Cooperation makes perfect sense. On the most ruthless, gene-centered view of evolution, helping people you're related to makes perfect sense. This is also there's a long and very annoying debate about, never mind, we won't do that. So, and just a final parting thought. It's very hard to estimate when the most recent common ancestor of all living humans was. How far back do you have to go to find somebody that everybody would be related to? But it's something like, recent estimates, something like 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, that there's at least one person that everybody would be related to 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Is that surprisingly recent to anybody? I find that when I read that, I was surprised how recent that is. We share something like, every one of us shares something like 99.9% of our DNA. Almost all of it. We are not a very genetically diverse species, actually. We had a bottleneck something 50,000 years ago that was like, almost all of us were gone. We're actually relative to, say, any species of bacteria, we are pretty similar genetically. We share something like 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees and something like 50% with trees. I don't know. This might be something like an argument for even the most ruthless gene-centric evolutionary perspective still entails quite a lot of caring about people you're related with. And you're actually related with all humans quite a bit. And you're related to all other living things quite a bit. Like more people than chimps and more chimps than trees, but like all of it, quite a bit. Yeah. 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 Yep. I think it's been, so 5 million years went from, is the difference between here. So our most recent common ancestor with chimps is about 5 million years in the past. It went from, and that divergence of 5 million years is the difference between 99.9 and 98. So that's how long it takes to have divergences. And you'd have to have, well, we keep hanging out with each other. So like, we keep remixing. So it's not going to change too much. Okay, let's call it there for today. Thanks, everyone.